Welcome everyone to the roundtable discussion. As we know, as the custom is, every October, we're a little bit later than October, but every October is the Black History Month in the UK, and every year has its theme. And this year, the theme is around reclaiming narratives. And so the research team in Africanness have decided to have a roundtable discussion, have a conversation around reclaiming narratives, racial identity, and mental health for families. I want to believe that all of us here have one idea or the other, or know a little bit about Africanness and know that Africanness is a children and young people charity. And so the courses and the programs of Africanness is championing the mental health of children and young people to make sure that we promote a positive racial identity in the young people, and that we improve their mental health through the initiatives that the different teams in Africanness go through. So I'll talk about those in a bit more details as we go through. The research team in Africanness, a few months ago launched a survey, and this survey is around racial identity socialization. So through this survey, we're trying to understand the conversations that parents of African origin are having with their children around racial identity, just to understand what the conversations are, or if there are conversations at all, and how these conversations are kind of steering the way that the children or the young people perceive themselves from a racial point of view. And so we have the QR code on the screen here. If you haven't taken part in that survey and you fall into the eligibility criteria, which is that you are a parent of African origin, I would encourage you to take part in this survey. It will take you just about 5 minutes. If you're not eligible for the survey and you know somebody who is eligible for the survey, please, I would encourage you to also share the link with them as well. The flyers will be put in the chat. The link to the survey as well will be put in the chat. So please share with them. We want to have as much data as possible so that it helps us to understand how to foster a positive racial identity in children and young people. So I encourage all of us to take this opportunity to engage with the survey. We have about 5 speakers with us today. I'm not able to say everybody, but I'll just call on each of them to give a brief introduction. So the webinar is meant to last 1 hour, and I plan to keep to time, to the T, so that we don't stay beyond our time. So I'll introduce myself as Grace. I lead the Africanness research team, and I am a clinical research professional who have had experiences spanning through healthcare, academia, not-for-profit organizations. And I am happy to lead the research team, and I am happy to contribute to the evidence base, as the research team values are for us to contribute to the evidence base towards racial identity, to help contribute towards neurodiversity and all the different projects that Africanness is embarking on. I'll go next to Dr. Emmy. I don't know if she's here. If you're here, can you indicate and just briefly introduce yourself for 30 seconds to a minute? Can somebody help me check if she's there? I can come back to her if she's not here at the moment, and I'll go to Jamie.
Good evening, everyone. Yes, so my name is Jamie Clark, and I am emotional health and wellbeing practitioner with CAMHS. For those who don't know, CAMHS is the Children's and Adolescents Mental Health Services. I would sort of provide psychoeducational interventions to young people in post-primary educational settings through delivering mental health programs around a range of topics. I'm also involved in I work in psychiatric intensive care settings. I would work with some people that are either young people that are homeless or facing homelessness as well. I'm currently a psychology master student studying at Queen's University in Belfast. And most recently, I've also started to work on a research project with Queen's, looking into sensory integration with adults who have ASD. Um, and yeah, I'm looking really forward to the discussion this evening.
Thank you so much, Jamie. Next in the line of introductions is Tiolua. Can you introduce yourself briefly to us, please?
Um, Hi, good evening. I'm Tiolua and I'm currently a Masters of Architecture student in the Centre for Alternative Technology, and that's just a graduate school of the environment. I'm studying sustainable architecture and yes, so that's just a little bit about me, and I'm interested in like storytelling as like a way to advocate for social and environmental justice.
Thank you very much. We're happy to have you here. Next on the line of introduction is Gabriella.
Hi everyone, I'm Gabby. My background is mainly in third sector / public health. I work for Forum Central and we do a lot of advocacy for third sector services in Leeds and sometimes goes to West Yorkshire. And yeah, I basically try and advocate for mental health services, mainly adults, but some of my role and the remit extends to children. And it's a lot around trying to make sure that the third sector services are represented in any sort of strategic broader mental health plans in Leeds. And yeah, also currently doing my master's in public health, and yeah, looking forward to having this conversation with you guys.
Thank you for coming, Gabby. Good to have you here. Next on the list of introduction is Vivian.
Hi everyone, my name is Vivian. My background spans through health science, clinical psychology, and I do research on neurodiversity. I'm currently the lead for Africanus Neurodiversity and Inclusion team. Yeah, happy to be here and looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you. Happy to have you here, Vivian. I don't know if Dr. Emmy is here. Anyone able to help me keep an eye on that? Okay, hopefully she'll join us in the course of the conversation. So without wasting further time, I think we'll just dive straight into the conversation around racial identity and how that impacts mental health of families. So this is a roundtable conversation. So feel free to include your questions in the chat box. Also, feel free to drop your comments. Feel free to put your suggestions, or if you have opinions about some of the questions or some of the topics that we're going to talk about, just feel free to leave it in the comment section. We're here to all learn from each other. So I think when we talk about racial identity in children and young people especially, that is such a formative age. The stage where they are in is the stage where a lot of factors around them kind of shape the way that they see themselves, and a lot of factors external to them, not just around where they are, but a lot of factors external to them. I mean, at that age, they don't have much control over a lot of things, but you find that there are internal and external structures or factors that kind of shape the way that they eventually see themselves as they grow up. So the first topic of conversation this evening would really be to the speakers. What do you think are some of the most influential factors that shape a child's racial identity? And we know that these factors would differ across different cultures. What do you think, maybe based on personal experience or as you have evolved as a person, what have been the most influential factors that have shaped the way you see yourself racially? I don't know who wants to kick off. Gabby?
Yeah, sure. So I guess my background is Ghana, and so yeah, both my parents are Ghanaian. They weren't born here; they came over to the UK. And I suppose maybe back when I was growing up, they both went to church as well. So we all know that church also has their own type of community. But then a lot of Ghanaians and Nigerians were also going to church, and I was going to school with a lot of Ghanaians and Nigerians, and my parents would cook me my food, like my like Ghanaian food, and so yeah, I felt like yeah, I probably growing up, even though I knew I was like British, like I know when I go back to Ghana, they don't necessarily see me as Ghana, even though I know I am Ghanaian, but I wasn't born there. So I know that I am British, black woman, but I also feel quite strong about like my background as well. And I think that's probably because I had two parents who are very confident about who they are, and they were very open about their backgrounds, upbringings as well, and willing to, share that rather than hiding it.
Yeah. I have just one further question for you. Do you think that there are factors that have imposed the way you see yourself racially? Or are there factors that you have defined for yourself that have helped you see the way you see yourself racially? Do you think it's all external from your parents? Because your parents obviously played like a really huge role through food and culture. Do you think there are other internal factors within yourself beyond what your parents have done that have kind of helped you to see yourself in a way racially?
Of course, yeah. So I grew up in London, so London's very multicultural. Well, a lot of my friends were like black, brown, like very diverse group of people that I grew up with. So I feel like that probably informed the way I see myself. Yeah, I never really had any sort of like illusions about like who I was, or I know that maybe some people from different backgrounds might have a bit of like identity crisis, but I definitely think either like my parents or like my upbringing living in London, I feel like if I was living up north where maybe I grew up with like more like white people, maybe I'd feel like a little bit different about who I like my racial identity. But yeah, I definitely feel like it's a number of things for sure.
Mm. I'll go to Tiolua next. I'm not being biased here, but I'm just creeping up. I'm starting from the younger ones so that we hear their perspective around the way they see themselves and how things have evolved for them from childhood to being young people. So I'd like to hear your perspective on this as well, T.
Yeah, so similar kind of like upbringing. I was like born and raised in the UK. My dad actually he was born in London, but he moved back to Nigeria, and my mum was born and raised in Nigeria. So yeah, I haven't actually been to Nigeria yet, so I don't know if like that adds a bit to like the mix. But I feel like I've been aware of like my differences like from quite an early age, because I mean I was born in London, so that was like quite multicultural. But then I moved to Hull, and that was very white. Like in a primary school of like 400, I was the only black person in that whole school. So I think like my parents were quite good in the sense like making me know that yes, I'm different, but then that doesn't make me like any less than. Like I kind of saw it as like me being unique in a way, which I think like is kind of like quite a blessing, because it could have been like completely the opposite way. But I did have that kind of awareness that like I am like different, but then that doesn't have to be a bad thing. And we moved to Leeds later on, and like at the time Leeds wasn't as like mixed as it is now. So like I've kind of been in areas where I've been like the only black person, not even like the only like ethnic minority in a space as well. So I've kind of like grown up with that and somewhat used to it. Yeah.
Do you just one more question for you. Do you think that has evolved over time as you move to areas that are a bit more diverse than where you grew up? And do you think that as you grew older and kind of maybe read a bit wider about maybe history or just things regarding race in general, that has evolved, that has kind of evolved the way that you perceive yourself racially?
Yeah, I would say like definitely like as I grew up, especially like in high school where it became like more diverse. Like I was more interested in like like obviously I had my like family community at home, going to church as well. Like so I was immersed with like other like Nigerians and that. And that community. But when I got to high school, I was more aware of that racial difference, like with like the Black people and like the white people and in school. And at times I did kind of try to understand like how people may perceive me in that mix, like me feeling more quite comfortable talking to both Black and white people, but then that's not always been the case with other Black people that I spoke to. So I was trying to like understand that as well. But it was more about like I felt like okay myself, but it's more about like I was concerned about how other people may perceive me, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Not to push too much, but there was something that you said that I just wanted to pick apart a little bit and wanted to ask you what you felt the factors that helped you. So it comes across as you had a wholeness in yourself, so you felt whole as a person, and you had that almost empathy to try and understand from different perspectives, because obviously people understand things from different perspectives. Do you think that was reinforced by maybe an example from home, being open-minded? And it's human nature generally to want to, move towards something that looks similar to you and something that you're more comfortable with, and you don't want to put yourself in uncomfortable situations. But being that open-minded and just being able to relate across the divide, do you think it's because of examples that you've seen from home, from your parents, or if there are other trusted adults in your circle that kind of led by that example?
I think my mom was quite good at that. Like the way that she would relate to her peers, like her family, would be quite similar to the way that she would relate to people like other white people. Like she'd be willing to like talk to people. She didn't really I don't know how to explain it, but she didn't really
close herself off, maybe.
Yeah. She was open to speaking to people who didn't look like us. So I think I just kind of absorbed that, and like that empathy of just being able to like bridge between like that divide.
Thank you very much for your contribution. I think there's a recurrent theme here, and there's something that I'm hoping that through this discussion and conversation that we'll be able to bring out, and that is the role of the family, the role of parents, the role of guardians, or the role of trusted adults in the life of young people, the role that they play to actually help young people to shape the way they see themselves, or to help them to understand and make sense of things around them that sometimes doesn't make sense. And the overall role that this play in helping to make sure that there's a positive mental health for the children and for young people. I'm going to move the conversation a little bit towards historical events, because obviously we know that there are lots of opinions out there, there are lots of conversations out there, there are lots of concepts out there, and the topic around racial identity would not be complete if we don't touch a little bit around history and the different systemic structures that have been set up over the years and time past, structures like colonialism, or structures like the media, politics. And we cannot underestimate the fact that these play a crucial role in shaping the narratives around racial identities. And for the most part of it, people have not had positive experiences or positive views around these things that I have mentioned. The question I'd like to ask is, how do we think these can be challenged? Because there is no denying that these tools or these structures have been used to create a certain narrative that is almost always negative. How do we think that this can be challenged? Vivian, do you want to go?
Yeah, I can. Yeah. So like you said, there are narratives that for many people, especially many Black people, we don't want to keep identifying with. And I suppose that's really the essence of this year's theme, which is centered around reclaiming our narrative, right? So if we speak about, for example, colonialism, based on the historical experiences that, for example, Black people faced with slavery and the inferiority that came from all of that experience and that narrative, we might say that that experience is in the past, but if you study the concept of intergenerational trauma, you also understand how these things can be passed down to even the generation after, long after those experiences have happened. So I suppose that we want to come to a point where we then start telling our stories in a more empowering way. Did colonialism happen? Yes. Did slavery happen? Yes. Was that a bad experience for us collectively as a people or as an ethnic group? Yes. But are there ways that we can tell those stories in a more empowering way um, instead of telling it in a way that disempowers us, right? So I suppose that's what reclaiming the narrative it's all about. And there are a lot of factors around this, in the sense that media has a role to play, because historically, again speaking, media has been known to tell stories in a way that portrays different races in different ways. So prior to now, there was really poor representation on the media and in storytelling also. I don't know why that is. Was it that there was no inclusion in that industry? But in storytelling, some characters we are played with some certain races. For example, the criminal would be a Black person, or the bad guy would be a Black person. So all of those things, we cannot underestimate the power of the media, right? And how it impresses on us and our subconscious. So the media also has a way to retell these stories in a way that the Black man can also be an amazing person. There are many Black people who have done many things. There are many people from ethnic minorities who have contributed to society. Can we tell more of those stories? Can we see more of those stories in mainstream media and also in literature and education, right? Of course, education, the mainstream education that we see mostly came from the West. So the curriculum is heavy on Western ideas, right? So as a people from the ethnic minority, most of our stories were not really documented, so to say. So I think that we have technology now, we have more resources now where we can start to tell our stories, to document them, and to push for our stories to come mainstream, so that the generation that we are in and the generation that will come after us would see our stories told authentically and in a way that empowers them to feel proud in who they are, in their history, and in their roots, and in their ethnicity and culture. I suppose that's the way to challenge it. It's really about telling our stories, pushing our stories to come mainstream, and telling stories in empowering ways that inspire us as a people.
Thank you very much for that contribution, Vivian. I'm just going to pick on something that you mentioned, something around generational trauma. And Jamie, I'll come to you next. And I wanted to just talk a little bit about your thoughts around generational trauma and how that affects the mental health of people from ethnic minority. And what do you think around retelling the stories that have been told wrongly in the past, and how that can serve as a healing tool for this generational trauma? And what would you think the strategies will be for families? Because you work with young people and you work with children. What would you think the strategies will be that families could use to address this racial trauma, especially with the children? Because sometimes these are things that are unconsciously passed on, but until you actually intentionally think about it and think about the way that it is passed on, you might not be able to stop it. So I would just like you to speak a little bit about that.
Yeah, thank you. So I think Vivian touched a bit on sort of generational trauma, and we think of sort of that terminology when it comes to things like intergenerational trauma and how that can be passed down through generations, and how that can then manifest itself through the generations, whether that be anxiety, depression, thinking about things of maybe feeling sort of helplessness, and how that sort of transpires into the generations that come. Now, when I sort of think along the term of when the young people that I work with and the young people that I see, when I think of strategies for discussing and dealing with racial trauma, I would sort of think I think the biggest one would definitely be educating, sort of creating that safe space for these young people to allow them to establish that environment where they can express their thoughts and feelings about that trauma or that fear without, thinking about the fear of judgment that comes with that. So I think one would be sort of creating that safe space for these young people, using things like tailored sort of interventions around age appropriate language. When we're educating young people about the effects of intergenerational trauma and maybe the hardship that they face within their lives, I think thinking about things that simple explanations that can allow for young people to engage in more nuanced conversations around this. And me and you had this discussion before the first time we actually spoke. For those that are listening, for those that have maybe watched it, there's a really amazing documentary on Channel 4 or ITV. It's called The School That Tried to End Racism. And that's with a school based in central London who has a population, 50% of the population is of white, and then the other 50% is of Black, Asian, and minority ethnic groups. And it's really, really good. The narrative of you've got that sort of the white kids growing up with this essentially this white privilege and this sort of unconscious thought that they don't realize that they have it, and then thinking of the background and that narrative of the children from those minority ethnic groups is really interesting. So I really highly recommend everyone to watch that. It's really incredible. I think, yeah, so moving on from sort of talking about age appropriate language, I think I love this idea of storytelling, and I think there's so much gold and empowerment when it comes to sharing personal stories. And I think if that we're talking about this sort of concept of generational trauma, intergenerational trauma, I think allowing parents and these young people, so their guardians, their role models, to share their own sort of their own experiences, their own racial trauma effectively, that then sort of leaning into that sort of vulnerability. And I think that can help children understand the weight not only of their parents' experiences, but what they can learn from that. And I think just encouraging curiosity around that, so that they can explore it, because I think of the sort of systematic inequalities that people from these ethnic minorities face. I think, they're going to come up against hardship, they're going to come up against closed doors. So I think fostering that environment that that they can ask questions and they can explore can definitely help in finding that narrative and finding their own identity and that sort of concept of their self as they grow up and come through the educational system.
Thank you so much for that contribution, Jamie. Vivian, I want to come back to you. And I'm coming to you because of your engagement in community projects. And so we've established that the guardians in the life of the children and young people have a role to play through sharing their own personal experiences, through storytelling of maybe what has happened to them in the past or what have happened to somebody that they know. But we also know that the community also has a role to play in supporting the younger generations, because there are lots of community projects going on for young people here and there, sometimes for parents, but for young people to keep them busy, to help them acquire one skill or the other. So my question would be, what do you think are some of the community projects or some of the community initiatives that can help young people kind of understand their racial identity a bit more? So in addition to what the families are doing and what the parents are doing, what do you think communities can do to kind of foster a positive sense of racial identity in the young people?
Well, I would say, for example, that when we talk about community and when we talk about community in relation to race, we think that the main thing to do is to expose our children to cultural communities or cultural experiences that validate their race. While that is one thing to do, I also feel like, for example, a child who is growing up in a diverse society like in the UK should be exposed to diverse experiences. So because when we, like you initially mentioned, when we come to a place, we want to gravitate towards the familiar. So whenever our children or young people come into a space, they will gravitate towards people who look like them, people who talk like them, and all of that. But I feel that to foster that inclusivity and foster that healthy sense of self and racial identity, we also want to expose them to a range of community activities that involve people, even from the white Western community, involve them in youth program, involve them in literary. I don't feel like our younger generation are very involved in literary projects. So I don't know if history is well taught in school these days. So maybe programs that expose them to art, to culture, to literature, to history. So that they can also, because if we want to change the narrative, it is highly rooted in storytelling, and that storytelling can come in different forms, right? We have social media now, and a lot can be done with social media, but how many young people are interested in going to social media and using their platforms to tell stories like this? So those are the conversations we need to start having, to say that we can actually use the tools that are available to us to represent where we come from, to tell stories of our experiences. And stories of our experiences, I always emphasize, in an empowering way, to think about the story you want to tell and what you want to achieve with that story. And would it inspire the next person? Would it empower the next person? And would it even empower yourself? So I just feel that parents need to expose their children to a range of experiences, a range of communities, not just communities that are specific to their own culture and their own heritage, but diverse culture, diverse heritage. I think that fosters that sense of self-worth, that sense of inclusion, and that sense of belonging, knowing that we're all human and we all think and act the same, and the only common denominator is actually love and unique experiences.
Thank you so much for that contribution. And from your contribution, a few things that I have picked out of it is that young people need to be exposed to a diverse range of culture. It doesn't have to be just their own culture, because then it opens their eyes to see that there is beauty in diversity, and that I think there's something that learning about a different culture does for yourself. It opens your eyes to see that there is actually differences all around the world, and that those differences come together to make it beautiful. So not just be restrictive towards learning about your culture. I think most of the time families or parents who are in tune would talk about their culture, stories about their native culture, but also for us to, as parents, to actively encourage our children to get immersed in lots of other cultures around us. There are always cultural celebrations around us. The Diwali is going to come up very soon. If we look closely, there is different cultures will have different celebrations that they have at one time of the year or the other. And it is also always encouraging to get the children to learn about other cultures, to kind of help them to understand the diversity that is around that. I'm going to come back to so we have a few more questions and then we'll take comments or questions and answers. Olufumilola, do you want to maybe type your question in the chat, or maybe you can wait and then we'll take it after the set of questions that we have? Thank you. So in light of all the things that we have mentioned, storytelling, getting involved in community projects, in literature, I think one very important thing as well is getting, like you said, getting involved in literature. I think the community libraries for communities that have libraries are a really effective place. And children can, I know that the Parenting with Purpose webinars have always mentioned enrolling children in the local library. It's free to enroll them and you can get your library card and borrow books. And I've seen that with the community with my community library, they make sure that there's a diverse range of books. And sometimes what I find is that from books from different authors from different backgrounds kind of gives you an insight into what the culture of that background is. So I was reading one of these books. I don't know, the kids brought it from the library, and it was from a Nigerian author. And even I myself kind of had to put myself in maybe the 1980s or the 1970s to kind of understand the concept and the story around the book. He was talking about a girl who was going to the market with her mom and carrying things in her head. And I knew that the Lagos of today is no longer that way. But then it kind of made me to think about the Lagos of 1970s or 1980s, where those kind of things were happening. So even for somebody who might be Nigerian now and who have gone to Nigeria, so the young people, for example, who have gone to who visit Nigeria regularly or who have visited Nigeria in recent years, might not really relate to that completely as something that they've experienced, but it also casts a background, or it gives a backdrop towards what used to happen a few years or a few decades before. So I found it really fascinating and I found it really interesting. And it's just a wide range of, I don't know, sometimes it will be books about hair, about the Afro hair, about how the dad was helping the girl gel her hair. And I just find it really fascinating, and I'm amazed at the resources that are out there in the library. And so sometimes I feel like we need to optimize or utilize the resources that we have available for us. But my next question will be to T and Gabby. So in the light of everything that we've said, what do you think, or how do you think the future generation, I'm not saying we're old, but how do you think your generation can build upon, so because the theme of all that we're saying is reclaim the narrative, tell your own story, counter the stereotypes, counter the negative stereotypes that have been painted about you. Do not reinforce the negative stereotypes that have been painted about you. So how do you think the future generation can build upon the theme of reclaiming narrative to create a more inclusive and a more authentic perspective around racial identity? What does that look like when you're thinking about it? What does that look like for you? What would you want to see in the future? Gabby, should we go to you first?
I feel like, yeah, I feel like maybe, yeah, more emphasis on community. I feel like as time has gone on, yeah, I feel quite, I feel like, yeah, more emphasis on community and togetherness, like as in the future, because I feel like as time has gone on, life has become like quite individualistic. Like people don't really have like much time to spend with each other, and so you relate to yourself by relating to other people. And I suppose like maybe when I was growing up, there was not really that much like social media, or wasn't really like a thing. Like you were kind of forced to like spend time outside with people and have conversations with people. Whereas now with the young people, even Grace, you were talking about the library. Even though the library is used, it's not really a resource that's used as much that I can see. People like young people are getting all their information from social media, and yeah, so I think it's a bit of a complicated one. I do think it probably starts with like more emphasis on community and probably like more education. And also I think also being in the work that I'm doing, there's a lot more emphasis towards trying to build services that are more trauma informed. So trying to encourage um more systems and services to think in a trauma informed way, and that gets people to think more like thinking about their trauma. So yeah, I do think like we are heading towards like a more positive direction, but yeah, it needs to be done from a systematic level, and more acknowledgement of like how individualistic society is becoming, and what sort of information children and young people are consuming online.
See, what's your perspective around this?
Um, yeah, I really agree with that idea of like community and like how there's a need for it to be like revitalized in a way. And also like we've been talking about storytelling. I think that's like a really powerful tool that can help like continue that like that reclamation of like the narrative. Because like I feel storytelling like it provides like a level of understanding and like pieces of like history to like those who are listening. And there's like some like I recently attended this Black creative like trailblazers like creative showcase in Manchester, and that was all about like reclaiming the narrative. Different like there was like a fashion show, poets, musicians, all like coming together like to express like Black excellence and Black joy, just like different themes like of like the like your and their identity as like their racial identity, and like as like part of the audience, that in itself was very empowering to me. And like so there's like this like two-way expression like between like the storyteller and the listener. And I feel like that like events like that like allow like give a platform for people to express themselves, and like the expression of like their knowledge of like of who they understand themselves to be in this world. I think that's like so powerful, because like knowledge is power, and like it has the power to enlighten different people and enlighten yourself as well as you're expressing it. And it kind of like and it can help like tackle like those dark narratives like been spoken about in Black people in the past.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that contribution. I'll come to Jamie now, because you come from the perspective of schools. So we've talked about what parents can do. We've talked about what community projects or community initiatives can do. What do you think the role of schools would be in supporting the young people's racial narratives and self-definition? Because if the parents do what they're doing and the community play their role, the school should at least support in reinforcing all those things that the young people are learning. What would you think would be the role that the school play in helping young people to foster a positive sense of racial identity?
I think it's complex. I think when I think of that, I sort of think about things, I think of educational initiatives, but I think more that, we talk about this concept of storytelling, and, Vivian touched on sort of the westernized curriculum essentially, but I think about things of, when I think of the educational initiatives that could be implemented, I think of things like We talked about storytelling, but even modeling positive identity within schools, and we talk about making the curriculum more inclusive for um, people, that is maybe is a predominantly a westernized community, or we maybe adjusting that to be making sort of flexible arrangements to that. And I think of things like simple things like celebrating heritage within the schools. I'm from Northern Ireland, which is a predominant white community. I've lived in a small town my entire life that's probably 98% white. And, I lived in England, I've lived in America, and that was me getting exposed to a range of people from different sort of backgrounds. And I think of even things like celebrating, people's heritage, where we've got St. Patrick's Day, or we celebrating, things around Africa, or things around in some of the schools that I work in. Today, there's two young ladies who are Arabic. So are we making sort of reasonable adjustments to them? Are we maybe getting a translator, which we do? We create all the material into Arabic for those young people as well. So things around modeling that identity, celebrating their events, and I think even coming from the perspective of someone who, my partner's Filipino, so I was oblivious to a different culture, in the sense that when I started to go to different sort of community events, and I started to see the difference in how they dress, what they eat, and I think simple things like that, exposing people from different backgrounds to different things, whether it be history, whether that be literature, whether that be food, whether that be celebrations, whether that be like dances, I think is really, really imperative to breaking down the barriers that these people face. I think that would sort of be a starting platform. But when I think of different things, I talk about that sort of inclusive curriculum, so that you're maybe celebrating those events, and you're being inclusive for people across the board. I sort of go back to this sort of creating this safer space, creating sort of safer spaces, and promoting those inclusive environments. That discussions can be held around identity, around race. That we're creating these open platforms so that young people can actually talk through their experiences, talk through the hardship that they faced. And I think even simple things like the training and development that can be put into schools in terms of educating school staff on these issues. Vivian talked there about the westernized curriculum, and I think we talk about history within this context, and it's things that we've always done before. And I think, can we implement things in, around Black history, around, Arabic, that these young people are in these schools, especially in the context of where I'm from in Northern Ireland, that they're not marginalized, where, the curriculum is being, it's being reasonable adjustments are made. And I think it just diversifies the entire process of something that we're coming away from a fixed educational system to something that is going to become, really inclusive of the environment, the young people that are within it. So I think that would be a start. Grace.
Yeah, thank you very much for that contribution. So in all the conversations that we've had, we've talked about reclaiming our narratives. We would not be oblivious to the fact that there are certain mental health challenges that arise from issues around poor racial identity and the mental health of young people. So my question would be, mainly for you, Vivian, and Jamie, would be, how can mental health professionals better support families in a way that is culturally sensitive? Because Vivian, from the research that you do and from the projects you do, there are lots of barriers towards seeking mental health help in the Black community. So how do you think that mental health professionals can help people better support them, to encourage them to seek help where they're needed?
So I think that the first place to start is the open-mindedness, right? So the understanding, because for example, if you are a white Western mental health practitioner and most of your experiences has been with white Western patients, for example, right? Your practice is like it's like boxed based on those experiences. You expect certain experiences, you expect certain outcomes, right? So I suppose that the first place to start is that mindedness to understand that race has a role to play in how individuals seek help and how they present to practices for help. So, for example, in the context of mental health, right, an average Black person is taught a kind of resilience that might make you endure some certain mental health struggles as normal, right? So by the time you're presenting and seeking for help, it might have been that you are at the point of breakdown, as opposed to a white Western person who is taught to just seek help when they feel that distress, right? So I'll use myself as as an example. I had a time when I sought for help while I was studying in Newcastle University, and I was made to wait for 3 months, right? Because, for example, my symptoms were kind of like minimalized, right? Because I was being judged based on general experience. But as at the time I presented, my symptoms were supposed to be like an emergency. And that's also that stereotyping. There's also the stereotyping in the sense that, so for example, there's a lot of research that show that if a white person and a Black person were to be in pain, that a white person would be treated first because a Black person is quote and unquote expected to have a higher threshold for pain. So I feel that for professionals, the open-mindedness to understand and to be interested in individual experiences, moving away from the regular approach to healthcare delivery to becoming person-centered, to paying attention to the person in front of you, what their individual experiences are, what their story is, where they're coming from, and how that might shape how they're presenting to your practice and the support that they need, and how that might influence or impact on their symptoms and what they're telling you. Being open to further training around cultural understanding, cultural competence, checking your own biases as well, right? Ensuring that your biases do not get in the way of your practice, because that can also happen subconsciously as well. For example, what we're doing with Africanness as well, like, Africanness being that that mediator for people in the Black community. I suppose that also is helpful because sometimes the problem may not really be from just the professionals. It could also be that we who are seeking for help do not trust the system or do not really have, confidence in the system. So it's also important that sometimes healthcare system or healthcare professionals could collaborate with communities and community leaders to ensure that there is that nuanced delivery of the care that they want to provide to certain community members based on their unique and specific needs. I think that might be something to explore.
Jamie, do you have any final comments to add to this?
No, I think Vivian done a very good job. No, I think the only sort of things I think when I thought of this is I love how Vivian talked on that sort of person-centered approach and breaking down that sort of generic approach. I love that. And I think of things when it comes to barriers around accessing these things. I think of stigma and cultural perceptions. I think often a lot of communities still view these mental health issues as taboo. So I think breaking down that, I think of the healthcare system, maybe the lack of representation in certain parts of the healthcare system. And I think having that sort of representation within the healthcare system will allow more people to come forward. Vivian talked earlier about you recognizing people maybe that look like you, dress like you, maybe people with the same skin color as you. So I think having that diversity, that representation within the healthcare system is a good starting point. I think even there's individuals out there that have that maybe historical sort of distrust of the healthcare system, from a sort of systemic racism point of view, that they maybe don't trust these mental health institutions or these sort of healthcare professionals. So I think even starting along the lines of breaking down the barriers, breaking down the stigma, and diversifying it, and allowing for easy access to the system is a good starting point.
All right, thank you so much for your contribution, and thank you to all the speakers for your various wonderful and insightful contributions, from your personal stories to experiences that you've had. Thank you all for sharing it with us. I'll open the floor for question and answers, comments from the participants of the discussion this evening. If you have any question, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question, or if you prefer to type it in the chat box, that's very welcome as well. So one of the questions here is, how can we create a more inclusive cultural celebrations that encourage cross-cultural understanding and learning while recognizing people from diverse backgrounds who often feel more comfortable within their own cultural groups? I mean, my thinking would be, for example, the Nigerian community in whatever city we have in Bristol. I know that apart from the Nigerian community, sometimes there are like ethnic or tribe specific communities, but the Nigerian community, for example, when they have celebrations, it's an opportunity to showcase the different cultures from within Nigeria. But I also think about things like international days in churches, for example. It is an opportunity where people are encouraged to dress in their ethnic attires. They're encouraged to bring food from their ethnic, from their culture, to bring it and share it with everybody. I've taken part in quite a few, and it's always very insightful. And it's a good way to learn about other people, because sometimes there's always the Nigerian-Ghanaian jollof war going on, and then you get a white person to come and taste these two different rice that we're always fighting about, the sizes and the texture and so it's an interesting way to learn about different cultures. Or you have the dances as well. So some dances look similar to each other. Some people want to do a dance off and things like that. So I think those are avenues that are really interesting for people to kind of share their own culture, but also learn the culture of other people as well. I find them very useful and insightful for me. Anyone has any other comments about avenues where there could be cross-cultural sharing of different tools?
Go
on.
Like watching films, like inviting friends over to watch, like have a cultural film night, like each bring a film like from your own culture, like watch them, and that can be like a very passive way, like you don't have to do much talking, but then just that idea of like collectively like watching together could be quite informative way of learning about different cultures.
Yeah, I think that's a very important one that I've not thought about. Yeah, and you find that you learn a lot about cultures from watching their film. You learn about the way their food, you learn about the way they dress, or even the way that they interact with each other, which is really good. So I think that's a really useful tool as well to help to foster cultural representation. Do we have any more questions? Feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question if you have any. Okay, in the absence of any question, I'd just like to say thank you to all the speakers, and I have a few more things to show us. So thank you for taking part in the webinar for today. At the end of every webinar, we normally want to get feedback to know how the webinar have gone, what your perception is, and there's a QR code here. It's just about 2 or 3 questions to give a feedback around what the webinar, how you felt about the webinar, if it covered the topics that you wanted it to cover, if there are things that you would like us to talk about in the future. Please take your time to complete that QR code. It's just going to take you about 2-3 minutes, and it's the link is in the chat. So please, I encourage every one of us to complete the feedback. It matters to us and it helps us to improve our webinars in the future. I also want to talk about the parent resources that we have on the AfriKindness website. So this is a QR code that would send you to the AfriKindness website, but the link will be dropped in the chat as well. We have lots of resources, parent resources on the website. Actually, you find resources around kids intervention and mentoring. We have the Empower project that the young people take part in. We have the kindness projects that they take part in during the summer. We have the AfriKindness Neurodiversity Community Project as well. We have the Parenting with Purpose. We just have different resources for parents that help them to be able to guide their children and young people effectively. So if you want to learn more about the resources that we have, please visit the QR code or the link in the chat. I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar that we have a survey that we launched a couple of months ago that we're trying to gather data to help us understand how children and young people engage in conversations around racial identity. So this is targeted at parents of African origin, and it would help us to understand the conversations that they have, if they're having any conversations at all. So I would encourage every one of us to please share these flyers with your friends, share them with your contacts, and help us understand and build an evidence base, because we've said lots of wonderful things, but until we have research that have been properly done and scientifically done and can be published, we might not have the strength or the backup to effect a change. So what we're looking at is that at the end of the day, at the end of all our conversations, at the end of sharing all our experiences, that we will be able to, in our own little way, have an influence on policies that affect children and young people, policies that enhance the perception that children and young people have about themselves and about their race and about their self-perception. So please help complete the survey or share it to friends. The link will be in the chat. You can take the flyers and put them on your status, or just share them any way that you can. It's targeted at parents of African origin. So your engagement will be highly appreciated. And that is another flyer of the survey as well. We have another webinar coming up in about 2 weeks' time. The parent team would be having a webinar on climate change 101 for parents. So there's been lots of talks around climate change. The younger generation, impressively, are engaging in climate change and are campaigning for us to make sure that we don't destroy the world completely before it's their time, before they're adults. So it's like, we hear so much around climate change. What is this about? As a parent, what is this about? And how can I get my children or young people engaged in conversations around climate change? What can I do in the family to contribute towards reducing the carbon footprint in the planet and all that? So please, you're invited to this webinar on the 19th of November. It's from 6 to 7:30 p.m. We have resourceful speakers who would be here to share their ideas and to just talk to parents about climate change and how they can empower their families to take part and navigate the challenges with confidence. And AfriKindness is represented in various social media platforms. We are on Twitter, on Instagram, on LinkedIn. The website address is there. The email is there if you have inquiries. So please engage with AfriKindness in one way or the other. There are lots of things going on there, lots of resources on there. There are lots of trainings for parents. There are lots of mentorship or intervention for young people as well. So AfriKindness is there to cater to the mental health of children and young people. So I would encourage every one of us to just take part and to engage in the resources and the good work that Africanus is taking part in. And I think before we go, I'd just like to give a quick shout out to the Community Fund for providing fundings for different initiatives of Africanus. The Parenting with Purpose training is proudly funded by the Community Fund, and I just want to give a shout out and say thank you to them for the fund that they've provided for us to help us to just carry out some of the initiatives that we are working on. And that's it for tonight. Thank you everyone for your time. Sorry I've taken extra 6 minutes of your time, but I think it's been an insightful one. I think it's been a learning process, and I think it's been a very informative one for all of us. And thank you so much for taking part in the webinar tonight. In the absence of any final comments, do we have any final comments? Or are we ready to call it a night? Thank you everyone for coming. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Bye.
much.
Thank you.
Bye.